Today I'm working on an EL Falcon that's been donated to the college where I work part-time, and as a result of that, a bit of a shout out to Mark Dennis of Craig's Auto Repairs for his involvement in the donation of this beast. It's actually not running at the moment, so we'll go through the diagnostic process and see if we can figure out why it's not and how we can get it up and running. So I think I've discovered the source of the problem, or the reason that it's not starting. Oh, hang on, my bad, my mistake. Sorry, Ford lovers. I think the tripod just slipped. Hang on a sec. Right, let's have a look at it. Let's start with the basics. I've put a little spark tester on number 5 plug lead, spark plug, to see if we're going to get any firing. It should glow. It should glow in time with the firing of the spark plug. So we'll have a look at number 5. And apart from it having 310,000 Ks on the clock and a slightly flat battery, we have no spark. That's the area that I'll focus on. Despite the motor cranking over, it's always important to make sure that you've got good clean 12 volts. That's what the ECU relies on to start the engine. Now don't get me wrong, it's not like I hate Fords or anything, I just don't like them. Part of the reason is because even just trying to find the ignition coil is a mammoth task. I've pulled off all the air ducting, etc. Out with the air cleaner, who needs it? Now hopefully I can get my arm in there to pull off the connector of the ignition coil and have a good look inside. Really quite difficult to access the coil, even the coil lead. So I've got the ignition on at the moment, and we should have at this point in time, just with the ignition on, we should have positive at the positive terminal and positive at the negative terminal. It then gets switched on the negative side by the ECU through a transistor. So let's have a look and see what it does. If I can find it, that is. Hello? It's in there somewhere. I've hooked up my test light to earth here. It's good earth, I've checked. And just put an extension wire with a couple of pins going into my injector. I just want to check my injector pulse at this point. I've got something going through my mind. I'm not sure if it's related, so we'll just make sure that it's got power going to it at the moment. Little red LED comes on, and that's an indication that we've got power to the positive side of the coil. I'm now on the negative side of the injector, and that should have positive as well when the ignition's turned on. So there you go, we've got the LED coming on there. And now we'll check for pulsing at the injector. Despite it falling off, you can see that there's no pulse at the injector. So we may have a switching fault somewhere, or it might be our crank angle sensor, so we'll check that in a while. After checking several electronic databases, I've come across this wiring diagram. It has a little bit in there that's helpful, but perhaps not as much as I would like. So I'm going to discuss a few combined wiring diagrams that I have, just to help you understand the diagnostic path that I'm on. Here's another diagram of our ignition system. Notice the Hall effect sensor there has 3 wires coming out of it. One is the signal out, one is the ground, and one is the power. So what I'll need to do is check for power. Of course, at this point I'll probably have to pull the distributor cap out, although it can be tested through the thick film module, which is this component here. There's a ground. The pip is the signal that comes from the Hall effect sensor and goes out to the ECU, and the spark out is the one that actually sends off the signal to the ignition coil eventually. So this is what I'll be focusing on to check my Hall effect sensor. I believe that this is the issue rather than the thick film module, simply because of the fact that the Hall effect sensor is affecting not only the spark but also the injection pulse. On the net, I've found a very helpful page, easyautodiagnostics.com, that relates to the thick film module, even though this is a different particular model, but it gives us the basics of the 6 wires that come out of it. The most important one, I believe, for what the trouble that we have with the EL Falcon, apart from the fact that it's an EL Falcon, sorry Ford lovers, is number 6, is the PIP input, which is a profile ignition pickup sensor signal. Now this is important because it states here that both the ignition module and the fuel injection computer use to know they need this to know the position of the piston and to start fuel injection and spark, etc. Now this is what we're not seeing. We're not seeing spark or fuel injection. So I believe strongly that our PIP is to blame, and I feel that it may be within the Hall effect sensor, but we'll check that on the vehicle. Hey. At the moment I'm hooked onto the PIP wire of the thick film module on the distributor there. I've just put a little pin in there, and I've got an extension wire going up to my test light, mainly because I've only got 2 arms and I can't hold the test light down here while I crank it. So now we'll have a look for a pulsing signal, and that will tell us if the Hall effect sensor is okay or not. Ignition turned on, you can see the red LED is glowing, but we crank it, we're getting no pulse signal there. So my next step is to look inside at the Hall effect sensor. So as you can see, I'm looking at the Hall effect sensor there with the distributor cap pulled off. We can see the coloured wires there. It looks like green, red and black. So I'll have a look at the wiring diagram, but to me, obviously the black would be earth, red would be the input, most likely 5 volt, and green would be our pulse. So I'll have a look at that, and then we can establish if it's a Hall effect sensor fault or not. At this point, rather than using a test light, I'm going to use my multimeter, because it's going to tell me if I've got good voltage there, but also it will tell me if the earth and the positive is good, all in one simple test. So we'll just see what sort of voltage we've got there. So here we've got 11.79 volts, 11.8. Okay, I've now hooked up my LED to the Hall effect signal wire. So you can see the little red LED is on there at the moment. It might be a bit hard to see, but it's definitely on there. We'll now look for a pulse. And clearly there was no pulse, so next step I reckon is Hall effect sensor.
Hall effect sensor. Hey! Hall effect sensor. Hall effect sensor. Ah. So what is a Hall effect sensor? Who invented it? And how will understanding how a Hall effect sensor works get our Falcon started?
This guy's name is Edwin Herbert Hall. He was born in 1855. Hey, check it out. He's got the same last name as the sensor. What a coincidence. Edwin Hall, Eddie to his mates, discovered the Hall effect back in 1879. What he noted was that when you pass current through a conductor, nowadays they use semiconductors, that when you put a magnet at right angles to that, you create a potential difference or voltage. That signal then in turn goes to the ECU. The ECU uses that information to provide spark as well as injection. Rumour has it that he discovered this in the basement of his mum's place, just messing around with some tools. It's a rumour that's never been substantiated. So how our Hall effect sensor works is that it has a permanent magnet on the one side of the shutter wheel. As you can see, this little shutter wheel has exposed windows, and that creates a magnetic field. The Hall effect sensor is a chip. No, not that sort of chip. A microchip. Well, actually, to be fair, it's not a chip. It's a layer made up of gallium arsenate crystal, but we won't get into that. And what that does is the magnet creates magnetic field at right angles to the Hall effect sensor. This in fact has current running through the sensor, and the magnetic field will actually interrupt that signal, and the Hall effect sensor will pick up that, and in this particular case, because of the shutter wheel design, it will give an on-off signal. I was able to find another distributor at the college, And even though the thick film module is missing on this particular one, that doesn't matter, we can use the other one. But what it does have is what we're after is the Hall effect sensor. Notice the wires, we've got green, red and black. Now I've back probed them there with the little terminals. The red wire is positive, black wire is earth. Now these, I incorrectly stated before that they were 5 volt. In actual fact, these are a 12 volt sensor, which is unusual. The sensor wire, the output wire, goes onto my test light, and that test light then, the other end of it goes to positive, not negative as you would normally expect. These will actually run between 12 volts, and I've had it as low as 2 volts and it'll still register on my test light. So let's just turn it on and see what it does. Okay, so all we have to do is turn the distributor, and you can see that signal going off and on. So we know that that Hall effect sensor is in good condition. So I'll put that on the EL and hopefully that'll get it up and running. So I've swapped out the thick film module that we had on the old distributor with the new distributor, or the second-hand distributor, with the good Hall effect sensor in it. So I've put them all back together. I've done a very quick timing setup on it. So now all we've got to do is turn the key, see what happens. Cool. So, quick recap on our diagnostic path on our EL Falcon. We started with no spark. No spark, okay, headed toward the distributor. But then thought we should check the injection pulse as well. No injection pulse. That headed toward the Hall effect sensor. The Hall effect sensor wasn't working, therefore it wasn't providing the pip signal that needed to go to the ECU. The ECU could then determine the position of the piston, could send the information back so that it could provide the spark as well as the injection signal. Put in another Hall effect sensor. Hey presto, good old EL Falcon's up and running yet again. So we're able to make this complex repair simple. All thanks to the discovery of a bloke by the name of Eddie Hall. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. We'll catch you next time. Bye. So if you enjoyed this video, guys, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you don't forget to share it with your friends. And sit down, give it some thought, and write a comment. See you later.